Militia state. There is a disturbance happening in Washington, D.C. Armed soldiers loose on the streets of D.C. There are a couple questions about this topic that must be answered. In this essay, we attempt to identify the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Armed soldiers do not have jurisdiction to operate within CONUS. By what process was this authorized? Under what authority? There are certain national restrictions to protect the citizens of the United States and the U.S. military from harm and being used in an inappropriate manner on U.S. soil. Who? There are restrictions to the actions being displayed within the Capitol, mainly the writ of habeas corpus has to be suspended to allow for armed military to operate domestically. Has this writ been suspended? Is there a larger threat to the nation's capital than angry patriots? These soldiers, as identified, are from 3 state National Guards. Standard issue equipment with aerial oversight have descended upon the heart of America. The biggest question remains, who gave the order and had the authority to initiate the action? What? These soldiers are in a defensive posture and have set up control checkpoints in and out of the Capitol area. Reports of mobile patrols and aerial overhead surveillance lead to a disturbing trend of imperialistic power being displayed upon the American people. By restricting movement of the populace and filter of authority, we have effectively created a militia state. A clear defined separation of the establishment and the people. We know that the military is conducting scanning patrols, long and short range surveillance on the population in loose cooperation with other governmental agencies. The National Guard implementation cannot be authorized within D.C. because the cooperation does not have state jurisdiction. What is the purpose for this armed force to occupy sovereign U.S. territory and conduct military operations within U.S. soil? Who do these soldiers report to? All military operations have a clearly defined command structure for operational command and control. When? The occupying military force has been in occupation since the events in the storm of the Capitol, maintaining continuous operations within the Capitol. When there is a domestic incident, it is the jurisdiction of the state or provisional police to deal with the situation if exterior implementations. Ability to reinforce with FBI, Marshals, SWAT, and Homeland Security. When we cease to ask questions about authority or intent, this trend leads to abusive misuse of assets and resources. Where? The National Guard has effectively consumed all authoritarian control over Washington, D.C. and established a precedence of command over process and systems. Where is the TOC of this command authority? Where is the voice of reason and judicial process in this implementation? Such military assets require a defined command structure for coordination and syncing of actions. Where are these soldiers allowed to operate? We can see an overwhelming presence surrounding the Capitol with patrols all operating from this location. One would think there are secondary command points and distribution nodes located within Washington, D.C. and possibly out of this area. Why? Why would a military force be deployed on U.S. soil? This is unprecedented and requires a massive loosening of regulatory requirements to enable. There are numerous safeguards that exist to prevent this action. We know that the National Guard can be released into states under control of the state's governor with limited authority and scope of operational requirements, but D.C. is not a state. It does not have a governor, which is a requirement and cannot be substituted. Washington, D.C. is an corporation which operates with a mayor and a board to rule over the Capitol provisional spaces. These officials are not voted for. They are emplaced by the Congress of the United States. So how are troops operating, and what cooperation was made with adjacent states to authorize this action? How? For federal activation of U.S. troops on domestic soil requires suspension of habeas corpus and declaration of martial law. There are no direct indications this has occurred. This authority can only be implemented by the President of the United States. We do know that there has been a declared national emergency within Washington, D.C. until after inauguration. With a declared state of emergency, you can activate the National Guard, but it does not give them the authority to be armed with live ammunition. Activation of the National Guard must be placed under the direct control of a governor of a state. This authority cannot be delegated down, and Washington, D.C. does not have a governor. States can request cross-state cooperation for intent of reinforcing and supplementation. This is usually drafted in a legislative agreement between town governors after a national emergency has been declared and will be secondary to the state's National Guard authority, in essence under their jurisdiction. Direct authorization for the issuing of live ammunition to these soldiers can only happen once a writ of habeas corpus is suspended. When did this occur? If all the preconditions have not been met or occurred, this can only be described as a military occupation of the nation's capital. Criteria: 1. Declared national or regional emergency. 2. Activation of National Guard placed under governor control. 3. Suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. 4. Initiation of martial law. 5. Issuing of live ammunition and updating of rules of engagement. 6. Absorption of external assets under military control. End state. Have these conditions been met? If they have not, this is a clear occupation of the United States by military forces. So the underlying argument, what is the authority? What is the command structure? Have the appropriate levels of progression to suspension of civil liberties been initiated? This essay serves to the point of questioning and beginning discussion to process and precedents. Our society operates by laws and process. They are imperative to the functioning of the republic. People must begin to question the actions of the establishment and the legitimacy of actions if our republic is continued to flourish and thrive. Unchecked power can only lead to unchecked corruption.